All right. Cool. So we've got high, low, turning points. Have a look at that list. Is stuff starting to emerge from that list where you say, wow, there seems to be a little bit of a golden thread linking these things together? So hopefully something should start to emerge. Now, my job with people like Meggie and Australian business leaders is to help them find those patterns. So that's kind of what I do. I often call myself a speechwriter, but I'm not really a speechwriter. I'm more a person who helps people identify the significant moments in their life and then structure them in a way, in a speech structure that is really going to land. I help them articulate their ideas. It's more like co-creation. But hopefully some patterns should start to emerge. Now, if patterns don't start to emerge, I'd like you to take a step back and ask yourself the question, if I got tapped on the shoulder tomorrow to speak at a conference, what do you think I'd be asked to speak about? So this question's a little bit about how you're positioned and known in the marketplace. If they were to tap you on the shoulder, what would they ask you to speak about? When I get asked to speak at conferences, it's often about etymology and words, even though I just think that's one part of what I know and talk about. But I'm known in the marketplace for that, so that's what I'd be tapped on the shoulder to speak about. So here's my question to you. What would someone call you up and say, hey, Joe, Meggie, we need you to speak about X. What do you think that X might be? And then I want you to ask the second question, which is, do I want to talk about that X? If you're known as the cultural guru, do you want to be the cultural guru? If you are, great, lean into it. Read every book humanly possible on being, the person who can diagnose toxic cultures, can generate new, more loving, kind, and information-saturated cultures. But if you look at what you think people would ask you to talk about and you don't like it, well, you might need to start to reposition yourself in the marketplace. Yeah? Cool. So have a look at that. All right. So I've had a look at, you have a story, you have strengths you need to lean into, you have a life audit survey, which is you have a look at your high points, low points, turning points. Now I'd like you to have a look at your life resume. Just have a look at all the stuff that you have done. And I want you to view it through a slightly different prism. I want you to say, when I'm at a cocktail party having a glass of red wine, what do I talk about? So the question's twofold. One, what do you naturally put on the table when people ask, what do you do? Who are you? What are you interested in? What do you naturally talk about? But also secondly, what do people ask you about? Let me give you an example. I often talk about being a teacher because even though I now am not in a school, I still teach. I went from teaching children to teaching adults. I went from helping them write English essays to helping them write speeches. So there's a commonality. So I often talk about teaching. But when I talk about it, I spent 4 years teaching in a big Catholic high school. No one cares. No one cares. Why? Because that's so normal and natural. So what? You're a teacher, you taught at a big Catholic high school. That's not interesting. What is interesting is I spent a year running adventure camps for troubled teenagers. That's interesting. And if I tell people about my 13 years as a teacher, they don't gravitate towards the 3 years I spent at a local Christian school. They gravitate to the year I spent running adventure camps for troubled teenagers, or the year I spent teaching Aboriginals in the outback life skills and trying to not get stabbed. That's what they're interested in. So here's my question to you. When you're talking to people about who you are and what you do and your life experience, what are the stories that you pluck from that great sea of experience that you know are going to be a winner? Or vice versa, when you're having a chat to people at a cocktail party, having a glass of red wine, and you say, well, I taught here, 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 and here, what do they zoom in on? Yeah? Hopefully you're going to start to notice that actually you get asked questions about a very particular and specific part of your life a lot. And that's your sign. That's your sign of what you should be talking about. Yeah? So have a think about it. The reason I say this is because humans are notoriously bad at identifying what's interesting about them. Yeah? Like we think, oh, I've done X, Y, Z, that's fascinating. And then in a side comment, we casually mention something and everyone's like, oh, wow, tell us more about that. I'll give you an example. I was helping a guy write a speech about his life and how he could get the ideas from insights, wisdom from his life and help business leaders. And it went for an hour. At the 58th minute, he said very casually, offhandedly, because we were like winding up the session, he goes, oh yeah, this reminds me when I was in the SAS. And I went, what? And it's like, yeah, it reminds me when I was in the SAS, I was in Afghanistan. I'm like, we've just been speaking for an hour and you didn't tell me you were in the SAS? You were like a Navy SEAL going these badass situations where you drop behind enemy lines and kind of killing bad guys and, you know, living on the edge. And it's like, oh, I didn't think it was relevant. Yeah. That happens to me all the time. People think stuff's not relevant, you know, but trust me, when you survey your life, things might be relevant. I mean, I didn't say to you when I was trying to show off my qualifications that I did a 4-year degree in teaching. I said I used to run a youth group on a Friday night. Why? Because that's where I learned to teach. When I spent a year living in America, I taught American teenagers how to ride horses. I worked on a horse ranch. That's where I learned to be able to stand in front of 70 loud, obnoxious, crazy, wacky American teens and tell them how to shut up. I didn't learn that in second year Macquarie Uni. You don't learn that stuff. So the stuff that I wouldn't possibly put in my CV or resume, or I don't think that is that important, other people go, hey, Nick, that's interesting. Tell me about that. So my question for you is, what is the thing that your audience or your friends or family or whomever says, hey, tell me more about that. That's crazy.
Is it a good idea, Nick, to talk to a friend or a partner or a colleague and ask them what they think is most interesting about you? Is that a good way to kind of help you distill down what is the most interesting stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say a couple of things. I'd think of it like a bullseye. So the bullseye right in the center, you start with yourself. You just kind of, you separate yourself from sound and noise and people and places. In fact, the quarantine, ironically, is the perfect time to do it, is you just sit quietly with yourself and work out what makes you interesting, what is fascinating, what do people talk about. But then you go out, so concentric circle, you go to the next group, which of course is friends and family. And you say, hey, what do you think people might ask me to talk about? What do you think people might find the most interesting thing about me? And it sounds a bit egotistical, but you just kind of go, hey, you know, I'm answering a quiz or I'm writing a story and I need to work this out. You know, so you work out from yourself, then you go to friends and family because they're really soft and gentle. They're going to help you out. Then you go to colleagues because they know you really well in a slightly different angle, you know, because they only maybe see you at work. Then go out into the broader marketplace. That might be you jump on Facebook and say, hey guys, I've been asked to give a speech at a massive event and I can choose whatever topic I want to talk about. What do you think I should choose? And I tell you what, people love giving their opinion and you'll get a bunch of opinions. And you know what will happen? You'll start to see patterns. And you might be a bit surprised by it. You might think, oh, well, obviously everyone will ask me to talk about X. And then you find out that a third of the people who respond say, oh, talk about Y. That's the bomb. And that's when you start to go, So the reason I say that is start off with yourself because you have intuition and you know yourself, but you've got to have many counselors. You've got to have many coaches and wise people to speak into your life, but start with the softer ones who are nice and know you and going to be gentle, and then move out further and then move out all the way to external people who can perhaps say, hey, you're kind of known for this, talk about that. Or, hey, I don't understand why you never talk about this. So for example, Meggie has 1,001 stories about being a great employee, about negotiating better pay, etc. But I don't necessarily think negotiating better pay when I think Meggie. I think reporter in hotspots. Yeah? So what Meggie would do is say, okay, well, that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about peak performance under difficult situations. Or if she thinks, well, I do want to talk about pay and I do want to talk about negotiation, what she'd do is she'd have a look at the stories and say, what might that story tell me about peak performance and negotiation, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's awesome, Nick. This has been super valuable. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. So if anyone in the chat has any questions, feel free to throw them in the little chat section. One quick thing, Nick, is anecdotes. How do you kind of weave, if you've worked out your thematic, like what you want to kind of touch on in your TED talk and maybe the overall topic, how do you then weave in those funny stories or those interesting stories about being in the SAS, being a reporter, being a grandmother of 3, whatever it is? How do you kind of weave that through your TED talk?
Yeah, great question. There's a couple of ways of doing it. One is you use it as like a framing metaphor. So your story will frame the entire speech. So that person in the SAS, he could write a speech that says, work is a battlefield. Yeah. And then all of the examples he gives is a story about him kind of survive, being in the SAS and the lessons derived from that. And so the entire thing is about that. So it frames the entire talk. Or you talk about your topic, and then every now and then you just drop into it an anecdote. What I like to do is you talk about the topic and give people really interesting information about it, stuff that's actually going to be relevant and accurate to their life. Then, so you talk about the topic. So the first thing you do, talk about the topic, is you give them, evidence, facts, stats, figures, quotes. What that does is it gets the skeptics in the audience on side. So they go, okay, this person knows about the topic and they've given us lots of evidence, so I know their qualifications and they really get it. Then they open their heart for you to talk about yourself as a person, because you've demonstrated, I understand this and I know about it, and you're getting valid information. Now, do you mind if I go off to the side and tell you a personal story? And they say yes. Now, you don't actually say, can I tell you a personal story? You say, this idea was highlighted to me really personally when in July the 14th, I was in Paris, and I found it really difficult to talk to the people. And in that moment, I realized that actually this language barrier is brutal, because I've spent all my time living in Australia. But when I was in Paris, I realized that you feel like a fool when you can't communicate with people. Then when I went back to my work, I realized that actually men and women in the marketplace are speaking a different language. Generation X and boomers are speaking a different language. In fact, if you don't have alignment within your company to use the right jargon and concepts, you're speaking a different language. And this is a terrible thing. So I suppose in that answer, it would be get people on side by talk about the topic, make sure it's relevant. Then once you've done your facts and stats, then kind of say, this is relevant to me, or I got the insight, or I got the full importance of this when this thing happened to me. The other thing is, actually, I'll give you one last model because you might find this really useful. Can you guys write down the word car, C-A-R? So stories are often a vehicle, a car, to get information into your audience's head. You're trying to get it from your head into their head, but you wrap it up in a story. And so CAR stands for context, action, result. When you're telling a story, you've got to start off with context. Give us the orientation, what's happening, 2 blondes walk into a bar. That actually tells us a huge amount of context. It tells us 1, who's involved, 2 blondes, 2, the location in a bar, and 3, the tone. It's obviously a joke. So everyone can go, oh, this person's about to tell a joke. So there's your orientation. So there's your context. Then you move into the action. What happened? 1, 2, 3. I'm sure when you tell a story, you could tell us 10 dot points of what happened. Don't. Just cut to the chase. Just get to the stuff that people really give a damn about and reduce it from your 10 dot points to say 3. What's the action? Boom, boom, boom. And then here's the kicker. What's the result? How did people change? Let me ask you a question. Who's the main character of Finding Nemo? Most people say Nemo and they're incorrect. The main character of Finding Nemo is Marlin. And Marlin, who's trying to find Nemo, has a story. So it starts off with C, context, sees his wife and kids killed and is terribly concerned about his son. Then he moves into action. His son is kidnapped and he has to go through all these experiences to get him back. And then the result is how he changes. So he starts off at the beginning as a clownfish who can't tell jokes. So his identity is stuffed. And he's concerned and scared and holding in. Then he goes through action, which is, swims out there, meets new people, has wild adventures, goes into the belly of the whale and is told to let go, finds his son. And then at the end, the R for result, what happens? he's changed. He is telling jokes, which means he's settled into his identity. He's a clownfish, so he can clown. And he's happy and he's willing and able to let his son, swim free. So he has changed and grown and developed. So when you're telling anecdotes, you either tell an anecdote that just makes the point really quickly. Culture is important that we speak the same language. I remember being in France and I couldn't speak the language and I felt like an idiot, and it was actually quite dangerous. So that's just a really quick anecdote. Or it's a story where you say, you flesh it out, give me the context, give me the action, give me the result. And if you tell a story which actually has a result, it's a bit like, when you hear Aesop's fables and they get to the end of it and they go, and the moral of the story is, that's what you need to say with your stories. You need to kind of go, and the moral of the story is, we need to communicate better at work.
Yeah, that's awesome. One quick final question from Cam. He works in tech, but he really wants to talk about music. And I think his question is a great one. It's what is your advice for folks who want to pivot their story? So if you're known for one thing, but you'd love to be known for another, how do you create that into a really powerful story?
Okay. I'd say there's a couple of ways. One is you have two distribution networks. You either kind of go, so everything on LinkedIn is all about tech. And then on Facebook, you just start to dial up, always talk about music. And on Instagram, you always talk about music. And on different platforms, you always talk about music until you get to a point where, you have sharpened your content and become known enough in the marketplace so that when you actually say, I want to talk about music in my professional life, it seems quite natural. That's one method. Another method is you do a bit of a continuum thing. You say, well, we've got tech here, we've got music here. What you might want to do is find the similarities between the two. What principles in technology do we find in music? Yeah. So for example, in mathematics and technology, because my brother-in-law did pure maths at university, they have an expression. And the expression is, if a proof, the way you write one of those formulas, if it's like really seamless and neat and it has all the extraneous parts removed, the word they use for that is elegant, which is funny because when I think maths, I don't think of the word elegant because it means class and style and approach and kind of, savoir-faire. But that's what they do in tech. Now in music, and I say this because my mum was a concert pianist, is that some people can play all the notes correctly, but it has no soul, no joie de vivre. The person needs to put their kind of heart and soul into it. So to answer the question, which is Cameron, you can talk about how in technology, sure, it's about the right coding, but it's actually about making it elegant and smooth and simple. And in music, sure, it's about technically knowing the scales and the notes and getting them in the right order, but it's actually about the vibe and imbuing music with a sense of soul and joie de vivre. And so you can talk about how they're similar, and you just keep giving examples of how tech and music are similar, in A and B and C and D and E and F. And then once you start to talk more about tech, so you used to talk about them 50-50, now you talk about music 60-40, 70-30, 80-20. It's a natural progression that once you have gone from what you talk about, tech, to what you want to talk about, music, after a while, people are going to say, yeah, tell us more about this music thing. Hope that helps.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for all of those wisdom nuggets, Nick. And thank you to everyone who joined us. I hope that you found this valuable. I found it invaluable to work with Nick. If you want to contact him, you can find him on LinkedIn, Nick Harding, or just email me and I'll connect you. hello@PepTalkHer.com. I've just posted the link as well in the chat session. If there's anyone else that you think would enjoy the Daily Power Pep Talks, feel free to send them the link and get them to sign up. We're doing them every day at the same time. We're actually uploading them all onto YouTube as well. So there's going to be a great library there. We'll send you every week. We'll just send you a digest of all the correct links. I've had to hide in my stairwell because a lawnmower started in my office. So sorry for the interesting background. But yeah, awesome to hear all of your stories. Cam, I can't wait to see your TED Talk on your love of music, and everyone else as well. Feel free to post on Instagram. You can tag us at PepTalkHer or Nick at Moment City with what you got out of today. If you've got any feedback, good, bad, or otherwise, we're always happy to hear it. And I hope that you're all staying happy, safe, and well. And we'll chat tomorrow at the same time. Thanks so much, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thank
Enjoy.
you.